5 after. I know we have some stragglers, but let's go ahead and get started. Bunch of housekeeping items today, a couple potential discussions, including a new SEP and then another upcoming SEP. But to start, wanted to remind everybody that we're doing, the newest thing on our Twitch stream is that we're doing triage on Tuesdays, and we're basically just going through the triage process live, kind of talking through the thought process, how we decide to triage something and address it. And we've been getting some feedback that that's giving some of our contributors more insight into why and how things get added and what that process is like. So feel free to join us on that or any of the other Twitches. Twitch streams are all on that Google Community Events calendar. This week, the core teams have focused basically on, continued work on tech debt, on some of the things that we've been working on magnesium. From a community standpoint, continued work on the new contributor tools, as well as the greeting bot. And a couple save the dates as well. So we have the Docs Jam coming up September 30th. We're going to do a setup clinic. October 7th, we're going to do a Docs Jam and basically just spend one day focused on the documentation and improving that, and we'll have more details coming out on that in the coming weeks. And then I announced it last week, but SaltConf is scheduled for October 29th. It'll be obviously virtual this year, and we have an open call for speakers. So if anybody is interested in speaking at SaltConf, I am going to drop the call for speakers or call for proposals list in the chat. And I have a question asking if there's a topic list of what we are going to cover today. Yes, there is. It's on the wiki. All right, any other questions before I start launching into things that are more meaty? Okay, so big thing coming up is that we this morning looked over the draft of a Tiamat SEP. That SEP is now, if it's not live yet, it will be live by end of day today. So just wanted to give everybody a heads up that the Tiamat SEP is out there. It's going to be open for conversation. Next week, we'll be setting aside some time to discuss it during the open hour. And I'm going to be the one who's kind of shepherding SEPs through the process for the, the couple open SEPs that we have right now. So I'll be working on that going forward. But if people have questions about the Tiamat SEP, let me know. I'm sure there'll be more to talk about once it's actually live. And then on a SEP-related note, I know last week we talked about SEP number 33, adding runtime registers to SALT. What, if anything, does anybody want to discuss about that SEP?
I'm going to put a link in the chat.
Yes.
Yeah, we started to review a PR with this one and just thought that it was big and a fairly big change. So we wanted to get it out there into a SEP so that we could get some dialogue on it and hear from some other people and definitely people in the community, because we just thought that it needed that. So we're just trying to get that communication out there that there's the SEP and we'd love to hear from people, and we think that there will be more coming. I think that in his commit message for the first one, it even said chapter 1 of my book on this. And so I expect there to be more. So it'd be great to hear from people.
Yeah, and we did hear the person, Timbus, who proposed this, said that he would love to join us for a community open hour, but it's at 3 a.m. his time.
Yeah.
To discuss this topic, but there is some commenting going on
Where's this
GitHub
commitment?
right there. Right? And then he said he hasn't given the proposal another once over yet, but we'll try to get to it since he doesn't think he can present it in person. Though I suppose there's nothing preventing us from doing a dedicated some sort of event or discussion to talk about this SEP. If that's something that people are interested in, we can certainly schedule it.
Yeah, we could even schedule it with, we do have people that are in other time zones, so we could schedule it and record it during a time that is good for him, and then publish that out just for more
Yeah.
information.
That's
as a
exactly
thought.
what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah, if he's interested in presenting it, maybe it's a half hour or something that we just throw up there, but I'll see what he wants to do.
Yeah, one of the things that I really like about the SEP process is that we can have that asynchronous communication across
Mhm.
time zones. It at times, sometimes for me anyway, I think it feels tedious to go through that, but I appreciate it because I feel like we get to have more collaboration across the globe, which is, I just think that benefit outweighs it, that I just need to suck it up and actually read, Sage.
That's actually one of my favorite things about this community is I like how it's, spans across the world and brings a lot of
Absolutely.
unique perspectives and experiences. All right, cool. Well, the Tiamat SEP is live. So everybody's homework, if interested, can be to look at that after the open hour. And like I said, we will talk about it next week. I'm going to have Tyler and or David Murphy and or Bryce on the call to kind of lead that discussion.
Yeah, and Bryce and Kirill and I think even Wayne and Shane, David Murphy, you guys have been using some of this, and so it'll be great to hear perspectives and dive in deeper.
Yeah, it was interesting even for me this morning to learn about where Tiamat is and isn't going to apply, and
yeah,
I was
It's
not
not
aware
gonna
of some
apply
of
to
that.
Windows from what I was seeing.
Yes.
yeah. At least initially, I don't
Or
know.
Mac.
Yeah, I don't know if that's forever, but I know initially for sure for some time. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was something that when we were talking this morning, we decided to call that out in the SEP so people know what to expect.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Well, with SEPs wrapped up, we have a couple kind of just open, broad, general discussions. One of them is that we are in the early planning phases of creating a community advisory board. It's something that Mo, Sage, Wayne, and I are kind of going to be working on together. We're meeting tomorrow to talk about what expectations would look like and what that looks like, but I'd like to hear what you all would like to see from a community advisory board.
Yeah, or if people are involved in one now that they think is run really well that we could look at and take the good from. And love to hear if people are doing that, or if they know of some, even if they're not involved, that they think can run well and well organized. We'd love to review some of those things and instill some of that best practices or good practices that other people have already learned from, so that we can start that off right instead of clunky, which is often the case when you're starting something new. And take what other people have learned instead of reinventing the wheel every time. It can be a little faster and more efficient.
Yeah. And one thing that I looked at is it looks like kind of some of the advisory boards that we've been looking at, they kind of have three jobs. One is kind of to watch for and implement and decide on best practices around the code and around the process, co-authoring SEPs or other enhancement proposals, and then giving advice on things like who leads work groups and that sort of thing are all potential things that an advisory board could do. But what else would people like to see an advisory board do?
Say those again. They could lead out on like SEPs, enhancement proposals. So kind of take over monitoring of enhancement proposals that are large. And what were the other ones?
Advising on things like work group captains and then just overall best practices type conversations.
Yeah, and I don't know of any others, and some of those are pretty broad, like best practices.
Yes.
Could also be like, how do we implement things in the code, or how do we develop process, or how do we do change management? And that could be a lot of things. And I don't know that that's necessarily what we're thinking. We're just giving it a broad base topic at the moment, since it's still in such an early phase that there's just still a lot on the table, but we would like to narrow that as we get closer to implementation of that advisory board, exactly what the goals are and the strategy behind it and the involvement and meeting times and all of those things that are a little more detailed and structured. Right now it's kind of broad.
Mm-hmm.
So we're open to what we think it's going to do, how it will benefit. I think that we see the benefit already as being more community involvement, especially with the SEP process and things like that, so that we can have that voice be heard and give that a body of people that's more of a governing body to lead out discussions like that, and see that as being a real benefit, especially to just get people involved, and then also to maybe even see how we can get people involved in the work groups specifically, and give those work groups some more structure as well. And so that's kind of what we're thinking, but of course it's early, open to ideas.
Yes, and I think this will be like everything, and that we'll put one set of ideas and things in place and then figure out what works and what doesn't and change it over time.
Yeah, absolutely. Iterative is a good way to go, because sometimes you set forth with one thing and then realize it's, in left field and got to go, maybe over to right field.
Yeah. I'm excited about the prospect of having like a more formal set aside time to talk about some of these things and get kind of a more formal, I guess is probably the right word, but more formal kind of feedback from everybody.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of details to figure out, but something that we wanted to make people aware of, something that's been coming for a long time and hopefully will be implemented sooner rather than later. I'm not sure of our exact timeline.
Yeah, I'm not either, since we're still in such an early phase. I don't know that we have that just yet, but we're definitely interested in making it real and giving a voice to that body of people and making things happen. I think that it's exciting. We're in an exciting phase of it, so that's kind of fun, and makes me want to move on it. But of course, we're moving on a lot of other things too, so it gets a little bit of attention. Hope it'll get more.
Yep. And I would say if anybody's interested in being part of that advisory board, just make me aware of that. I'm not sure what our selection process or anything will look like yet, but the place to start will be to have a pool of people who say, hey, I would like to be part of this. And so that's something that I can start keeping track of. So just, DM me if you're interested in that.
Is there any kind of a cash prize?
Cash prize for what?
Like a check?
I mean, I can probably hook you up with some sweet salt stack swag, but that's about it.
I like swag. I accept. Good call, Shane.
What? Yep. Yeah. What techie person doesn't? Isn't that why we go to conferences? Okay, not really.
But I enjoy it. I do enjoy that part.
Yes, that's why we go.
Yeah. I mean, I go because I like to socialize and teach, but that's a whole different thing. All right, well, the other community initiative thing, and this is something, again, I would love, I see some people whose faces or whose names I don't recognize in this chat, especially would love to hear from you all. Type in the chat, speak up. But the other thing that we're doing is we're trying to improve the new contributor experience. So if you're a new contributor, you submit a pull request, it's been acknowledged, you have an idea of what to expect, how long it'll take to process and look at, and you'll have links to other resources. And so we're putting together this greeting bot that will be kind of it'll say something along the lines of like, hey, thanks for submitting your PR. These are some other resources you might like. This is our process. But if you were a new contributor to SALT, what would be, you make your first pull request, what would be the first couple pieces of information you would want from us? And please type those in the chat, let me know, because this is something that's going to be created here in the next few weeks, and I'd like to make sure that You all thinking back on when you started contributing, what would you have liked to know then? What was your most common question? What was it frustrating to find out? Any of that information, please put it in the chat or speak up so we can be sure to include it.
Yeah, last week we had some really good feedback about just getting started, you know, like if I just want it to work and I don't want to have to configure everything myself, what is that? And so really good feedback and specific enough that we can, you know, pinpoint it and go back to it and start from there, and love to hear more things like that. Specific feedback on what you would have wanted to know as a first-time contributor, or just new to the project, things you expected that didn't happen, or processes that seemed weird, or lack of, or anything like that.
What have you liked that other open source projects have done when you've started with them,
Yeah.
or other communities?
Yeah, I'd be interested to know if anybody's, you know, done code triage for another project like Ruby on Rails, or some of those that use that open source triage product. And we've looked at it, considered it, haven't made a decision on it yet. I wonder if people are using something like that. Be interested to know.
Okay, so we have some feedback in the chat. The single biggest issue historically and now with PRs has been a lack of unit tests, and now the requirement to have unit tests. I think the new requirement for unit tests is a general good idea, but a way to streamline a unit test process would be great.
Yeah, good feedback. And I think we're mid, I guess, implementation of that, since it's still new. I guess, Wayne, you can talk to that more. I think that we've started on some things and we're interested to do more and to streamline that better. We've had a lot of, I think we've had some good success with the test clinics, and so we want to do dot clinics and some other things there too, and open to some more ideas and getting things more documented or written out in a form that is easily consumable. I think that's the next step. Is correct me if I'm wrong, Wayne.
Yeah, no, I was just curious what you know, the way to streamline the unit test process. I was just curious what parts of the existing process are clunky. Do you feel are getting in your way? You know, like Sage did say, you know, we've got the test clinic that have been running and working through, which has been super helpful, I think, to everybody who's attended, especially if you just aren't sure where to start with your tests. You know, it's been good for me to run them, and I think other people have also found a lot of benefit in them as well. You know, so those who don't already have the skill or knowledge to write tests, we definitely are trying to help out there as much as we can. And you know, we have shifted things in the past. We were taking like about 4 hours or more to run each full test run on the PRs, but we've actually gone and measured and realized, oh, hey, you know, we can get about 80% of the tests in 20% of the time or less. So like in 20 minutes instead of, you know, hours and hours, we can actually run over 80% of our tests. So we did that, which is drastically reduced the amount of time.
I don't mean to speak for Nathan, but I think the point he's making is that since we haven't been requiring unit tests, we have a lot of modules that don't have anything written. And then when someone submits a PR, they're required to build the whole framework and the whole file that they need to start writing unit tests, instead of just adding a little test to an existing file. I don't know, maybe that's what he's talking about.
That's actually a really good point. And I think that is definitely something that I've heard people say, maybe not quite. Usually it's a little bit more specific, like, well, there's not anything here, so I don't have anything to go off of. It's daunting. And I think that's why we have the test clinic in place, is to really say, okay, well, let's see what we can put in place here, because we certainly don't expect to, start from scratch on your own. That seems very daunting even to us. And so it's about a collaboration and getting something.
Yeah, and Nathan had a response for you, Shane. He said he hadn't run across that point, but if I was writing a unit test, I would definitely agree with that if it happened to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, and I think
thanks.
the
That's good
document.
feedback.
Well,
Yeah,
it
and
happens to me all the time. That's
touche. And I know that we've had some documentation out there that is in a draft PR maybe by Wayne to update some of the, I think that's what it is. I don't think it's we had some stuff in the contributing guide that was in hacking that talked a little bit about unit tests that I think is a draft PR, but I think there's even more that's either in a work in progress or a draft that we hope to continue to work on and iterate on. And makes a good point. I should go and check on that and find it and see if we can even get some feedback on it.
And then another point that Nathan makes is some of the things mentioned, like clear documentation, easy to find documentation, definitely things that we know we need to improve. Starting with the fact that right now we have about 5 different areas that the contributor guide lives in. So we need to start figuring that out. And then on getting the word out about the clinics more. I know people don't necessarily know that things exist. So as of right now, your sources of information for events there's a Google Calendar you can subscribe to. And then every Monday I post a post that says what's happening at SaltStack this week, and it'll list steps that are out, any like major other release news, what the core team is focusing on for the week, and then I always have a section in there that lists the Twitch streaming schedule, so our test clinics, our R&D, and our triage, and the open hour, and then working group schedules as well. And that gets posted on Slack and the Google group and on the community wiki, and then I post a link to the community wiki and IRC. So those are several sources of information for the types of events, but some of these events are newer, and so you can't necessarily keep track of them all right away. But if you ever want to know what's happening, those are your good sources.
I think SoundTech put out a update to using Knox. I'm not sure if that was on like a publicly available space. I think it was. I got put on our site, but I don't know if I could find it right now if I needed to.
Is that something you want to talk about right now?
Well, it was just, I think that goes along with the docs that he's talking about, clear documentation, easy to find.
Yeah, I'd like to hear about that Knox update, because I think that would play hand in hand too with just ensuring that that's with our contributor guide review, since I have seen a handful of different references in how people are either using Knox or not using Knox. And I myself kind of don't have experience with using it just because it's been a bit of a confusing workflow for me. So I'd like to, if he's posted that in either Slack or if there's like a PR update that maybe needs to be done if there hasn't been, I definitely like to be either tagged on that or kind of reference with that info.
I think you got put up on, is it Conveyance? I can't remember what the tool is. The Atlassian thing we use.
Confluence.
I think you got put up on Confluence somewhere. But
Got it.
I don't know, and it should probably be public. But he talks about the upgrade to PyTest and how to use Knox and kind of historical behind it.
Oh, are you referencing the blog post, maybe?
Yeah, maybe it was a blog. It might have been a blog.
Yep. I am.
So that would be a good
Posting
thing
right
to
here.
have. Easy to find, right?
Yeah, it needs to be
Yeah,
somewhere
that's it.
that's not a blog, but for now, like it needs to be somewhere else, I think, in addition to the blog, but that is a place that it is.
Agreed, totally. I'll probably that could be part of the contributing guide
Mhm.
conversations on kind of what can be pulled from that blog, because I can't remember if we were talking about using reference links to the blog is probably the platform. It might be moving stuff, right? So I suppose taking information from that blog post to be able to have that included directly in the documentation.
Yeah, the blog has been migrated to a different platform now.
Okay.
So the whole community.saltstack site is now housed off of the SaltStack main page versus through the Bevy service we were using. But yeah, I think this is one of the biggest things we need from a contributor guide and from just documentation is what is that, like one source to rule them all sort of place to go to find what you need. And right now there's about 4 different places. What else? If you were a new contributor, what would you want to see? What would your questions be? Like for me personally, I think one of the things that I think back to when I started, I would have wanted to know more about how the release process looks from beginning to end and be able to see that clearly laid out in a chart somewhere so that I could have an idea of what to expect. Somebody in chat suggests a URL like developer.saltstack.com would be an idea of where to put that one-stop show. That is an option, is potentially on the SaltStack site. We've talked about using the community wiki. But yes, it needs to be something clear. And it needs to be, if it's not housed on some way in saltstack.com, it definitely needs to be easy to find from saltstack.com. All right, nobody else has things that they, I'm just kind of curious, like what was your first question when you started contributing to SALT? I'd love to see that. Post them in the chat, please. What's the very first thing you wanted to know?
What the hell is salt?
That's a good one. Jot that down. What the hell is salt? But yeah, no, that's a good point. Like somebody just stumbles across it, doesn't know what it is.
One of the questions that I've heard a lot of people ask is how is it different than, like, what are its major differences, its benefits? And in some cases it's at a loss for the word, whatever the opposite of benefit is.
Challenges.
Challenges, yeah, sure. Some of the other like similar projects in the same space. So like, how is it better? How is it different than say like Chef or Puppet, Ansible? Like, that's a common question that I hear a lot.
I'm making a list of these, by the way, even though I know I'll put them in the open hour notes, but I want to be able to refer to this more easily.
And you know how we have this concept of personas, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Oh yeah.
you might want to like approach it from, you know, if you're an IT guy, this may be the questions you would have. If you're a developer, these might be your questions. I mean, because I came from a purely sysadmin perspective, and I'd never heard of Salt, and I'd never really coded Python, and so for me, I had a ton of questions, you know. So
yeah, I mean the personas is a good call in general. Just I know we talked about it a couple weeks ago when we did the release process FAQs open hour, and Mo talked about the different personas and how we put them into consideration as we create our MVPs and as we create the product. So it could be helpful for users to know who the personas are.
Yeah, and some of those personas we took from real people, real, community members and customers that we've talked with, and shaped those so that we could understand that and create an empathetic map, with users in mind. But we're always developing those a little bit to make them just make them better. And I think that does help some of us that come from a role that's more narrowly focused, so that we can understand somebody else's view and then have that, empathy.
Yeah, it helps to put that people focus spin. So for the contributors, our persona is Community Chloe is the name. And what does Chloe want as she's contributing and participating?
I'd like to add a Windows Willie in there. Somebody who's
Windows.
never touched a command line, because that was kind of the world I was coming from. I mean, I touched command line, but that was definitely not my strong suit. And suddenly I had to do everything on command line, and that was a pretty big hurdle for me at first.
Yeah, we've even talked about and started internally, like, what is Git for somebody who's totally new, and what's that concept? And I think that we could use that even in the community, because it's and just point to some open source resources that are available. When we did the port jam, we had lots of people that are like, well, I'm not familiar with GitHub, and we kind of forgot about what that was going to be like. And, except for that, all of us probably experienced it at some point in our lives. Some of us, it may have been a while since we thought about that, but those questions are valid, and we should answer them and have something available to at least point to, if not develop our own. This is how you get started, and exactly what this is.
But as to what Shane said there too, about like, about a Windows Willie, that I had seen before too, that a lot of people from Windows, what they would know would be PowerShell. I mean, PowerShell's become pretty much the de facto approach to a lot of automation around Windows systems. And so, like, I've seen some issues that come up in Salt that were like, I'm trying to execute this PowerShell command with Salt, but I'm having issues. And if there was like if we had something like for that persona, pretty much a guide on going, this is how you do execute. This is how executing PowerShell works, and this is like how the objects come back, and this is how they can be used. The data can be then like used after the fact. I think that would be helpful to Windows people, because if otherwise they're presented with other tools like Chef or other configuration management tools that have early on kind of like partnered with Microsoft to try to create docs tailored specifically to that persona. So I don't know, I think like things like that's a good idea of having docs tailored toward that those particular users in that case.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And
I really like one thing on that though. There's also the issue of doing things the salty way, and shelling out to a PowerShell or command prompt, which is what somebody who's coming with no experience in configuration manager or anything, they're used to writing scripts for everything. So then they look at Salt and they, I'll just run this command.run. And that's not stateful, and it's not the way, we can have a discussion on this some other time, but it would be we should encourage them to learn how to do it with Salt states, find the existing modules, and maybe how to write one if it doesn't do what you need it to do in a salty way. If that makes sense.
Yeah. And I suppose then from a development perspective though, you'd want to be able to show how to develop a state that's using PowerShell, right? I suppose I haven't developed states in that or custom Salt modules targeting Windows systems, but I imagine it's not just pure Python, is it? Or is Python actually running in many cases like PowerShell commands in order to make changes, because of that being sort of like the first
we try to stay in Python code as much as we can. Okay. And only shell out to PowerShell. There are a few modules that basically do PowerShell under the hood. but it's returning it back and then manipulating everything in Python. It basically dumps everything to JSON, and then what Salt gets back is a JSON data structure, and that's what Salt deals with after that.
I think what Shane is saying is we need a line of t-shirts that have the phrase "when in doubt, shell out," and then like a red circle and an X through it.
Yep.
But that and that's also like from a configuration management side, right? Because you also said there's that audience that's going to be like systems engineers or sysops that are reacting perhaps to incidents or things that are going on, and then Salt being that ability to do remote calls against systems as opposed to them maybe relying on PS remoting or something, right? So then in that case, they likely would be shelling out, right? Unless you'd be then trying to say, no, that's even not necessarily something you would suggest for Windows users either.
Yeah, well, it's just the problem with shelling out is just that it's not stateful, and you can't guarantee that it's in the state that it's supposed to be in.
Okay, we did have a couple other feedback items from the chat. Not specifically related to the PR, and this is a little bit what we were just talking about, but not specifically related to the PR process, but as a new Salt user, Gary said that one of his biggest challenges was documentation. It's mostly fine as a reference, but even non-Python documentation is very Python focused and it can be difficult to digest. There's a dearth of how to do this documentation and not nearly enough examples. And I can agree with that. And somebody else said there's a huge learning curve to do almost anything useful in Salt, and that might make us lose market share, especially if you're not a Python expert. And then, let's see. Yes, the examples are way too basic. We need more advanced how-to guides. If there was one how-to guide you wanted in more advanced, what would that be?
I think that a lot of what we have heard in the past, you guys can tell me if we're right, how to advance guys on sort of those core, functions of Salt, and to how to use Salt formulas. Some of these things that I think that we on the development team use day to day that we could probably provide some better examples for, and go a little deeper. Instead of just having it in our heads, it's a place to start for sure.
Mm-hmm. Also suggestions how to write an external pillar, when to use them. Oh, that's come up a few times. How to do pillars and when we need to use them.
Another thing I saw at the beginning was that they assumed in the docs that I knew a lot of things.
Oh, that's a good point.
Yes,
that I even knew what a pip, what pip was, or how to install something with pip.
We do. There's a lot of assumptions throughout the documentation that I don't know how we would clean that up at the moment, but I think we would take it one chunk at a time, and make some cross-referencing better. If you're not familiar with this term, see here, or link here, and get people back to some basic documentation. We've been talking about that really high level with a theme that is working, I think, quite well on the enterprise side, and we're interested to look at how we might be able to use that documentation theme for open, and we're just not there yet, but we're definitely thinking about it and want to, because it gives that if you only need to see a little bit of information at one time, you can, and if you want to dig deeper, you can then go and dig very deep. but that it's all still there for you and you can navigate back and forth easily.
Yeah, more talk about the pillars, which I posted this in the chat, but that has been a recurring conversation, I think, both in IRC and Slack, and then in a couple of these open hours, we've talked about them as well. So that might wind up being a higher priority and depth how-to guide as we get to a point where we're writing that stuff. And then one other kind of related thing again, Nathan said continuing the current topic of new SALT user instead of new developer. One issue is the workflow of developing new SALT code. The normal process of commit to a Git repo and a branch, test it on a master is a bad workflow while developing. I found SALT SSH to be a far better workflow, but I also consider it to be the redheaded stepchild of the SALT project. Improving it would be great, but yeah, we did change the workflow. It was actually, was it 3 weeks ago now, 2 weeks ago? 3 weeks ago, we did an open hour that was just purely on the frequently asked questions about the release and the release process. And that open hour addresses that SSH topic in a little bit more detail. And then let's see, in the, oh, there we go. Perhaps a guide on setting up a SALT development environment, which makes it easier to quickly iterate through writing modules, etc. Yeah, like a quick start guide. Is that what you're thinking? Right now, the current workflow is slow, but Gary has some suggestions on using LXC Kitchen to make it faster. And there have been some suggestions from Slack as well on that. We had somebody who was doing.
I think there are some docs about setting up a dev environment for SALT. I know there's some for Windows. I just don't know, maybe people don't know how to find it or where it is.
Yeah.
And then the guy that worked a day on the pillar, he was working a whole day on writing an execution module, and come to find out he needed to write a pillar instead. And I think that goes along with just assuming that we know, as we're reading the docs, we know what we're trying to do. And I think having a better understanding of SALT, like an overview, and I'm sure those are out there too, an overview of SALT and what an execution module is versus a state module, and pillars and grains and how all those are supposed to work and the purpose for them. I'm pretty sure that's out there, isn't it? I know we've had SaltConf talks on it.
Yeah, and there were meetup topics on it, but
I think that this points to where to be able to navigate easily into the docs is actually something that we need to work on. And sometimes we know, sometimes we don't. And I believe that this is there as well, but I can't easily get to it even right now when we're talking about it. And yet I feel like Shane that I think it's there. So I think that we found what we need to work on, and that's just to navigate to what we know is there.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny how often somebody will be like, oh, today I learned this document exists or this guide exists, just because you find the stuff randomly. I do like in the Zoom chat as well, there've been a couple like, thank God for people from Slack, you know, I'm glad that we have IRC people, and I like seeing that, you know, community members are available to help and answer other community members.
Yes, so I just did a search for salt architecture and I get Syndix and Multimaster, and that's way beyond a basic introduction of how salt is set up. You know what I mean? How
Mhm.
everything works together.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to. Sorry.
No, it's all right.
Side rail you.
No.
I think it's a good point, and I think that it's a little bit of tribal knowledge and a little bit of how our documentation and our guides have sort of just grown into a massive amount of information that's a little bit hard to sift through at times. Coming in new, I know I found that to be the case as well. I was like, but there's so much out there that I'm not really sure where I start, and then as I have questions, how I get into this. And I think it's good to go back to that kind of high level. How do I get started? And then if I do have really specific questions, how do I search for it, or how do I reference something better? And that, I think it's worth looking at.
Yeah. And that's a good point. People start to get easily confused by terminology. They can read pillar, read a description, don't understand. And then also people don't necessarily look for documentation directly from the site. Like, I work for SaltStack, and my inclination would probably still not be to go to the website first. I would just Google whatever I was looking for. And that, you know, is not necessarily always the best information or the right information. Pillar specific question, an example, docs say that states are rendered on the minion and pillars are rendered on the master, but I don't know what that actually means to be until I bang my head on the wall for a while.
It's almost like everybody needs to take the salt admin course.
Right? Or come to SaltConf. I'm sensing a SaltConf topic that needs to be.
Yeah, but
I
even
know
that,
everybody
I still think that we need to make our documentation more easily consumable, and that is a gigantic, broad ask for us to do, and yet we know we need to do it, and we've been trying to, you know, eat away at that elephant one bite at a time, and we still have a lot of work to do. So we acknowledge that there's still a lot of work in the documentation to make that more consumable, and it's going to take some time for us to get there, but we love the feedback, and we love to hear from you guys, especially some of these really specific details on how we could make that better, because that helps us to focus and to at least take a chunk and bite it off and make it better.
Yeah, I feel like we already have, you know, a few kind of highest priority items, and the first just like, welcome, this is what you contributed, this is the process to expect. But then it sounds like pillars, just thinking back over all the conversations, that could be a higher priority thing as well. And definitely just terminology and stuff is always a hard thing. Like a glossary. Sometimes I feel like I need a glossary.
We have one. I even know how to get to that fairly quickly.
I do not. Well, this is great. I mean, I have a good list of stuff and kind of have it grouped into sections now about testing, about just general references, about pillars, and about new contributor FAQ. So that's all really good stuff to work on as we, yeah, this contributor guide's not an overnight project. It's a probably through multiple releases project, but we'd like to have some at least initial welcoming stuff in place by the end of this release. And then we had one final suggestion. This doesn't surprise me coming from Tyler, but he wants documentation on how to turn a SALT module into a pop item project.
You should submit an MR, Tyler.
A what?
A merge request.
Oh, okay. I should have known that. What is it you say? DYA, define your acronym.
That's right. Or TLA.
That's it. That's it. Oh, Tyler says no, you.
Oh, okay. I'll see if I can do that.
Oh, getting feisty over there in the chat. Well, cool. We have a few more minutes, so what else does everybody have on their mind? This was kind of my big goal for this this thing, was to find out what people would want in a new contributor guide. And certainly, I mean, if you think of other things, DM me, put them in Slack. I pay attention to my DMs and we'll respond and make note of things.
I think we need graphics, pictures.
Mm.
I mean, I'm looking for like just an architectural graphic, and I can't find anything in our docs.
I think that's probably one of my biggest things that I think we need to, because it's just easier. It's just easier for me to follow a process if I look at a picture or a diagram, and I think a lot of people who are visual learners are like that.
Yeah, I don't know that we've put a lot of that in our documentation just because those files tend to be really big, and to update them, we don't have a good single source of truth, although Derek and I have talked about that a little bit, and to get there. But we do have stuff on YouTube where we reference amazing pictures from our marketing teams and our product teams that do give that. But it's true, it's not in our documentation, I think, just due to the size of documentation today, and some of those pictures being rendered would be heavy.
And I'm also working to collaborate with our trainers internally who are kind of making graphics for their own, for the things like the sysadmin training that does include architectural related diagrams, because I kind of want to see if we can get a lot of what they're working on into repositories, so that we could have, when we build our documentation, if we could just reference and pull stuff that they're working on out of their repos into our build process. Because if one team over here is doing it and they're doing a great job and it looks great and we should have that in front of more people's eyes, I'm trying to figure out what's a way we can somehow integrate a lot of our doc sets that are, all using, like our getting started guide, for example, I think it only uses Pandoc. And then I don't really know the publishing process for how that gets up there. I don't know the last time an update was accepted for it, or even what that process is. And then there's the open salt docs, right? Using Sphinx in a particular theme. And then there's our enterprise site using Sphinx in a different theme. And so it's kind of trying to see how can we get a lot of that stuff, our teams talking to each other, especially if we're already producing great content like that. Because I agree that I think we should have more of the visual aspect to it, because really it does at times just mostly look like, walls of text, and that can be rather intimidating or too abstract.
Yeah, totally. And I think we're still at some really beginning where we want to, I think that this is what you were saying too, Derek, that we have a lot of really good ideas, and it seems really daunting, and we don't know how to harness our wonderful community to help us get somewhere, because we're still at such an early stage, and we're still just figuring out how to even leverage our internal resources that may not be part of development or open as well. And that's going to take us some time, but we're definitely open to those ideas, and we'll push through. We'll get there.
And now it's getting a little meta.
Well, and on that note too, I just want to say that the docs working group meets today, and is after this, I believe.
Yes, in 2 minutes. And it's getting meta. Somebody said that they joined the open hour for the first time, and they weren't fully sure what it was. Or they didn't realize that it could be like a place to ask questions and give feedback. So I think that maybe I need to change up. And I've been playing with the open hour description anyway, but I think I need to change it up a little bit more. And when I publish that agenda every week, make it clear that people should come and have a conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Great feedback.
Yeah. And as always, if people have topics they would want to discuss, we've had all sorts of things. We had somebody who was looking for help on the kitchen project. We had somebody who wanted a walkthrough on, a piece of triage or something. Like pretty much any reasonable request we can add as an open hour topic to the agendas. At this point, I keep kind of a backlog of what's coming up. But the way to get things on the open hour agenda, DM me, post them on, there's a Google form you can submit stuff through. Those are probably the two best ways to give me topic suggestions or things that you want to know about. All right, well, great conversation, everybody. Thanks for joining me. And Definitely make notes of all these contributor guides, and I'll work on changing some of the open hour information. Also, for those who are new to the open hour, after the open hour is over, I download the videos from Zoom, upload them to YouTube, watch the videos, and make notes about what happens to the open hour. So the open hour notes go on the wiki, and then based on feedback from a few weeks ago, the YouTube videos now have a timestamp for when we talk about each topic. So if you want to just watch, a specific topic, you can click right in the YouTube description and find the timestamp. So working to make the notes and the YouTube more cohesive and easier to find what it is you want. So on that note, I have to pop off to documentation working group. And so I will see you all next week. Thanks for joining me, everybody. Bye.